Hi, so this is going to be a short video just explaining how to use this little utility I've written for Vegetation Studio. So it's just the standard Vegetation Studio for if you're using 2017. Pro's great on 2018, and it will do all this kind of multi-tile workflow much easier. You just need one instance and it can deal with multiple terrain tiles. But on the standard edition you have to add a vegetation system for each of the terrains that you have in your world. So if you're doing multi-tiled streaming, it can be a real pain adding each one and then tweaking each one as you work. So I've just got a demo scene. It's got however many terrains I've got left. I purposely am just using a small number of terrains because otherwise it takes ages to bake, but the process is the same irrespective of how many you've got. I guess the one thing to say is there is a limit on your own machine's RAM, so as it's baking all the vegetation items, if you've got a lot of items dense and a lot of tiles, it will eventually just Unity will eventually run out of memory, so yeah, you'll be in trouble. It'll just force close essentially. So you might then want to work in smaller chunks, so you can do that, and that's one of the benefits, I guess, of working with baked vegetation. But let me, rather than rabbiting on, I'll show you the utility. So very first of all, I need to give a huge thanks to Leonard for not only making Vegetation Studio but also allowing me to rewrite his tool. So his original tool, which I've used, is the Vegetation System tool. And it's pretty basic, but it does what you want. You just, if you're using VegetationPackage, you just throw it in here, click on Setup Vegetation Systems, and it will add vegetation systems onto whatever terrains it finds, or if you've got them nested inside. So I guess that's another way when I'm talking about chunking. If you're going to run out of RAM, you could put each one in parented to an empty game object and then throw in that game object one at a time and set up your vegetation and do it that way. So that's his original, but I'll show you the one I've made, which I've put into multi-terrain. I personally have rewritten his one just so that it appears under multi-terrain, and that's where my one is. I've called it Vegetation System Batch Bake, and it's pretty similar. You'll notice there's the source terrain, and then there's this, you drop in a package. Hopefully it's not too intimidating. I've just added little comments on each of the buttons. Pretty much the first half is all that you need to worry about. If you're interested in seeing what it's doing, enable debug output, just end up just telling you what it's done. So your source is the terrain, and you don't need to if you're just wanting to add it to every single terrain in the scene. But if you're having to split it up into smaller groups and you're, as I say, parenting them, so for example, if you had done something like that and you put them all inside one, you could then just drop this in and then it will only deal with these ones. But I'm just going to deal with all of those. Oh, by the way, what I just did, I just used, or wherever it is, I've got a little editor script that does that grouping, which I can make available as well. Not mine. It's just called group command. It's pretty easy. I found it on the internet, so I'll try to find the source and make that available to you. That's just then using ctrl-Q to essentially group whatever's selected. But the one that I'm going to talk about is this, and you can put it in the editor, in a root editor folder if you want. I personally tend to just leave it kind of where it belongs, so inside of, where's Vegetation Studio, Awesome Technologies, inside Vegetation System, inside Editor, there it is. So let's get to business. I'm not going to go into how Vegetation Studio works. you should obviously know how it works before dealing with this. So I'm going to not set the source terrain, and you have a choice of using either a prefab or just a vegetation package if you've got one already. Perhaps say if you're loading in, you know, say Nature Manufacturer's Meadow asset, it comes with a vegetation package that you can use. I'm going to use one of my own. It's basic, but it does, you know, it'll show us what's going on. And one of the things, I'm just dragging and dropping, one of the things, the time that it takes is based on, as I said, how many items there are. So let me, how's the best way to do this? Actually, I do prefer it floating. I think I'll just, let me come into this terrain. Let me see a little bit what's going on. Right, so I'm not selecting a source, it's going to affect all the terrains in the scene. I've just dragged and dropped a prefab that I made earlier. I want to add persistent storage. This is the whole point of my tool. It's intended for anyone who's going to then, you know, add that to whether using Sector or World Streamer. And I want to bake the vegetation into persistent storage packages so that they get loaded in quickly and efficiently as the tiles load. So I'm going to add a persistent storage. Yes, I do want that. I want to bake that storage to an asset. Where's the asset going to get stored? And just add a storage path. If the path, obviously make sure it's in assets, but beyond that you can rewrite that if you want. If it doesn't exist, it'll create it. So currently that's empty. I'll just delete that just to prove my point. If it doesn't exist, it'll create it. And then this force enable veg items excuse me, this force enable veg items is after you've baked the persistent vegetation storage once, it sets all the items to be disabled for runtime generation, which is what you want, because you wouldn't want the same items being generated twice. It either comes from the store or it comes generated at runtime. But as you're rebaking, you might want to then force those to be back on whatever package you're using. It'll make a lot more sense after I've just run through a few examples. So that's the basics. I'm just going to go, yeah, add it all. It's a little bit of a blurb, and it will replace, if you've already got vegetation packages on there, it will replace things. Now, I guess before I do that, I should show you the traditional way of how you would usually add Vegetation Studio to the scene, which is this way, isn't it? You just go add it from the menu, and then what we're adding, because of this, so traditionally it's looking for an auto select terrain. If you've only got one terrain in the scene, actually, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Fine. And we're just dealing with this 3-1. The kind of stuff that you would usually be dealing with is you'd have a package in there. So hey, let me show you my basic package, and yeah, that should make sense. So sometimes I find it doesn't actually generate. That might be okay. Okay, so that's probably a case of me saying, right, activate runtime spawn. Actually, just let's double check. Yeah, so yeah, learn by my mistakes. I've just dropped this in and I'd done a previous bake, so it had set all the vegetation items to be disabled. So traditionally when you're using just one system, you just press this button, enable runtime spawn, that will re-enable everything. So that's essentially what this is for. So for this selected package, if I click on that, it'll look for it in any of the terrains and activate. Essentially it'll press that button lots of times on wherever it finds it. I don't need my utility for that. I can just enable it. So yeah, so that's the package. It's got very basic grass, and some trees. It's got 3 items, and so that would be your basic how to add it to one terrain. Now the multi-terrain or the multi-terrain tile workflow is you would add that in, but then delete your vegetation system. You'll notice I've got a vegetation system prefab here. I'll show you how that works in a bit, but the process would essentially, to create that whole, if I delete that, you would set it up as I have done, and then you would just drag and drop it into your project, just create a normal prefab like any other. So that's how that prefab gets made, and I'll explain why they're useful, because that's not immediately apparent. But for our multi-terrain workflow, let me re-enable that. So obviously you need the manager, the Vegetation Studio manager in the scene, and now we're going to add vegetation systems to each of those terrains. So I pick the package I want to add. I've gone through these options already. Let's click and do it. So a couple of things will happen. There'll be nested vegetation systems on each of those, because, and you can see they're starting to appear, because I picked that package which I've dropped in here. That's where it appears. If I go into the vegetation tab, you'll see they're disabled, the items, and that's because we enabled persistent baking the persistent storage. It created a storage asset in that folder that's defined here, and if you remember, I deleted it, it's recreated it, and here they all are now. Each package is associated with a terrain tile, so it uses the name of the terrain, and then just tells you that it's a persistent store. And I mean, that's it. You got your terrains, and they each have their persistent storage. Now the other utilities, delete all, so sometimes you want to start again. Gone. So it does 2 things. It deletes the assets, and it removes all the vegetation systems off the terrain, so it's a kind of a clean slate. Alright, let me bake that one again. So I'll bake that one again, do it. So you can see, because of the time that it takes to bake things, why I've gone with only a few terrains and not too many vegetation packages. Now you'll notice that sometimes you have to kind of click on the terrains, or you even just save the scene to get it all, like to wake up and know that it's there, or even at the worst case scenario sometimes you need to go into play mode, but hopefully it should just appear. That's just a Vegetation Studio thing. So I've got a different package. I can throw that in and then go add vegetation system on all terrain. So that's the warning. It's kind of saying anything that exists there already is going to get replaced, and it's going to delete anything that it finds in the name store. So you could rename that and use another store folder, but it will remove all of your vegetation systems. So I can't open it, but any of the vegetation systems that exist there. So if you've made any tweaks to the vegetation systems, they'll be lost. So just go ahead and do it. Okay, so that's the other package. If I go back to the original one, you can kind of keep essentially swapping, and your store, you just trashing the store, resaving the original. Now, why do you need the other one? Sometimes you need to force that on. Let me see if I can force this out. It's not really an error, but it's a kind of an idiosyncrasy that if I bake without re-enabling the items, it's actually managed. But sometimes you might find that these are still disabled during the bake, so it's up to you whether you want to turn that on or not. I've got it there as an as a fallback. If you find that you're baking and it's kind of not enabled, then you can do it that way, and then kind of hand in hand with that is you could say, right, I've just baked that package, I want to make sure that it's activated, so you can just activate runtime and it'll make sure that that package saved here is all enabled. Just a little add-on utility, not a biggie. Something that's possibly more useful, so you've got all of these set up, but you might want to add an additional package. So currently we've been swapping from one package to the other, but you can also pick a different package, and then instead of just adding it to all terrains using the method, you can just add additional vegetation package. So let's add it. Now in the same way, it will use the persistent storage and bake persistent tick boxes. So if you don't bake it, it'll just add it as an additional package. That's the original, and that's one. I haven't actually renamed it stupidly. I probably should to make it more sense. So package name is called that, like pack 2 or whatever. And then you can choose to swap, in whatever ways you do. So you can add and bake, or just add if you undo those. Up to you, but it's kind of can be handy. It can be a good way to do it. Right, let's start again. Delete all. Clean slate again, and talk about the prefab. So why might you want a prefab? Took me a while to work this out, and one of the reasons, okay, let's do it. Let's explain by showing you what the problem is when you're just doing it this way without actually using a prefab. So the kind of thing you might start doing is, so in the global settings you might start messing around with the grass and plant density, tree design. Let me do more trees and less of everything else. Not sure if I've got any trees. Actually, my rules aren't spawning any trees anywhere near here. Yeah, so that's kind of going a bit crazy in terms of, oh, of course, I'm only affecting, and and there's another reason why prefabs are useful. So as I'm affecting things, I'm affecting only the global vegetation system for this terrain tile, not for all of them across the whole of, so not this one as well. If you go into here, they're all your normal settings, so I'd have to go on each one of those and go, right, I want that kind of plant density or vegetation scale or whatever you're so any of those things that you're changing essentially outside of the vegetation package, they don't get saved in here. A package is literally just this part of it, the items and the rules for those items spawning, but it doesn't include the global settings. So the kind of thing that I end up doing is, as I showed you at the start, I'll just make one, I'll set it up as I want it, or I might have a package, for example. So let me delete all of this, delete all. So throw one in, start it up, just say, right, I want to work on this terrain, and then I want to say, as I've done already on this one, actually I want denser grass. And actually no, I'm say fewer trees because it's kind of it'll just, you know, bake for longer if I do more of everything. So I've already got more grass, so let's do fewer trees. So I wanted to alter that. Now I apply the prefab. Yeah, it turns itself off, but that's fine, it's saved to the prefab instance. So now you can delete that and you can say, okay, so now I want to use a prefab instead of just a vegetation package. And you still got that choice. You can still choose to bake and add persistent storage. So just for the sake of showing you, let's not do that, let's just keep it live. So you have to start it now because it's all runtime, and there's my other, you know, so each of those now is sharing exactly that, right way, sharing that rule of more dense grass. Yeah, I come back and slightly fewer trees. So let's say we want to make a change to that, and you can just again, I'm going to delete all. Probably should add delete. I probably will do even in, oh no, it's there, delete all, makes sense. Oh, and a warning about vegetation system prefabs. I clear my log. As soon as you select it, whatever's going on in the inspector to preview what it's going on, it throws up some errors. They're harmless. It doesn't affect anything at runtime at all. It is the GUI errors. If you look at what's going on there, it's to do with it's missing a GUI layout because it's expecting to be inside the hierarchy, I think. So yeah, just so that you know, that's harmless stuff that you're seeing here. But so let's say that you wanted it to change, so you would make your change. Let's tell it which which terrain. Undo which terrain we want to be dealing with. So it's in settings. In fact, you don't even need to do that because let's say I just want to say no, I liked having a normal amount of trees, and go back and apply. So obviously if you want to see it as you're working on it, you would have to go into settings and tell it which terrain, or a terrain, or select auto terrain. But yeah, that's more trees, and let's say a more sensible grass density. Fine. Apply. You can delete that, and then you can just go again. This time, so I want it baked. Yeah. Okay, and there it is. So that's about it. I mean, any questions, get in touch. There's the GitHub link to the script in the description. Enjoy. I hope it's useful, and as I say, big thanks to Leonard, who not only let me use his script but also helped out with a couple of the issues that I was having.